So first of all, we'd like to thank you, Mr. McGee, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for today's stream.
Yeah, no problem. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, as fans of your series, we're pretty excited that your studio is going to be doing a new project.
Well, we'll see. We hope we get to know the new project. It's up to getting enough support from fans of the Alice stuff to make that happen.
Yep, I really hope it happens. I'm looking forward to the signed Blu-ray. I backed it today for that.
Yeah, a few of our members did today.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's looking like it's on a pretty good track right now. We're approaching 100,000.
Now, where has that
And last time
gone?
I looked, it says that we're funding if we keep up this pace. So, my fingers are crossed, and we'll see how it goes.
So, as with many great stories out there, maybe we should start tonight with the beginning. Would you like to give a little brief synopsis of your version of Alice's adventure so far?
Sure. So you'd like kind of the story about Alice and her journey, is that right? Yeah, so... in the first game, it opens up with us seeing Alice's family home burn down. And then we open up again inside an asylum where Alice has been institutionalized, and she's dealing with the emotional trauma of having lost her family. And so the game really revolves around the idea of Alice battling the psychological representations of the emotions that came out of that event. So we see characters in the game like the Mad Hatter, the Queen of Hearts, that are in fact embodiments of emotions like rage, guilt, sadness. And so she's working through Wonderland as a way of sort of healing herself. And the goal there being obviously that once she's healed, she then becomes able to free herself from the asylum. And so the entire first game is really a journey for Alice to free herself from potential insanity and also to free herself from the asylum. So then in the second game, obviously Alice has, if you've completed the first game, then you've helped Alice escape from the asylum. In the second game, we find that she's now out on the streets of London and has taken up residence inside of a home which is owned by a doctor, Dr. Bumby, who's trying to help the street urchins of London and help these wayward children and orphans to make their way in the world. And so she becomes, one of these kids, although she's definitely much older than them, but she's there helping Dr. Bumby and presumably on a path to recovery, still dealing with, the trauma of the loss of her family and still trying to wrestle with these memories that are haunting her. So when the first game, takes place, we actually see that Dinah, the family cat, is presumably responsible for starting the fire by knocking over a lamp and causing the fire. But as we open up the beginning of Madness Returns, we start to realize that Alice is questioning that history, that these memories of that night are starting to return to her, and she's starting to have a feeling that it wasn't the cat. In fact, you're following a cat through the intro here, and that's one of the reasons why we chose the cat, as the icon to lead her down the rabbit hole this time, because it was the cat in the opening of the first game that we saw start the fire, and so it's the cat in the opening of this game that leads her essentially into Wonderland to resolve the mystery of who really did start the fire. And that's the backstory for both the first and second game.
Yeah, I didn't even catch the cat reference following it through these streets when I first played this. That's awesome.
Me neither.
And Muppets, if the Kickstarter is funded, they'll be sending out a thing, and you'll be able to choose the DVD or the Blu-ray. It's been changed. It just couldn't change the tiers because someone had already backed it.
Yeah, we are going to offer a variety of formats. I think the main message there is that people should just not worry about this. We get questions. People want to know, will they be able to play it on their iPod? Will there be a DVD? Will there be a Blu-ray? The answer to all that is yes. Within reason, we're going to supply the animations and in as many formats and on as many types of discs as possible. Obviously, we're going to probably avoid putting it on VHS tapes and sending it to people. But when it comes to the modern formats, Blu-ray, DVD, and then a variety of digital formats that you can put onto all your devices, we will make sure that people are able to get access to those. Yeah, and so this, like the animation that you're seeing right now in game, this is 2D motion graphics that was created by a guy in Shanghai with our artists. His name is Ed Goyne, and so he's just confirmed that he's going to be able to come back on board and do more of these animations. So among the animations that you'll find on the DVD will be some in this style that he's going to do. And then we also last week confirmed that Troy Morgan, he's a stop-motion animator. He's going to do some. And then next week we're going to be announcing animators who work in 3D, computer-rendered 3D, who are going to be coming on board. So, when this is done, you're going to see that there's quite a variety, a range of styles, and that each animation has its own little story. It has its own director. It has its own tone and feel to it.
And I really
like
the animation in this one, the 2D stuff, so that'll be cool to see come back.
Yeah, my hope is that we end up with something similar to the Animatrix. I don't know if you saw that series of animations that were connected to the Matrix films. Yeah, that was one where they had a number of different directors, each working in a different style, each telling a sort of mini story within the universe of the Matrix. And so that's exactly the kind of thing we'd like to do here. Different directors, different styles, each within a different brain in London that Alice is going to be exploring.
Do you have any ideas for who you might want to do these styles, or is that something you can't talk about right now?
Well, we've already announced last week a guy named Troy Morgan who does the stop-motion animation. If you go to the Kickstarter page, I just put the link in the chat there. You'll find a link to his work, and so that's the first announced director that we have. Then the second we're going to announce in a day or two is going to be Ed Goyne, who's the guy that did the 2D motion graphics animations that you see in the game as we're playing right now. And then a little while later next week, we're going to announce some 3D animators as well. And I'm hoping before the campaign's over, we'll be able to announce some cool directors and writers who are going to be coming on board. But, getting those deals done in time, it may be challenging to also make the announcement.
So everyone seems to be asking the same question, and I'll pick Limones from Form Vaporous. He's asking, what's in store for Alice in this third installment of the series?
Well, there are two different things that we have to consider. That what we're talking about for Otherlands, there's the videos, which would be the animations that we're talking about, and that's what the Kickstarter has to do with. And then there's the possibility of a game based on Otherlands. And so for both of them, the core idea is that in the first game, Alice mastered the psychological. In the second game, she mastered the physical world, and she defeated Bumby, who was a physical bad guy. And in the third game, she's going to marry these two masteries together, and that's going to give her the ability to go into the wonderlands of other characters, so the people that she meets on the streets of London. And that's why we're calling this Otherlands, because she'll be exploring their subconscious interior of their minds. And the sort of mystery and the challenge for her in this third game is going to be not trying to solve her internal psychological problem, not trying to save herself and the children the orphans at Bumby home, but instead to save society as a larger whole. And so she's now fighting and using her powers to try to overcome a much bigger, darker evil that's threatening to sort of imprison all of us and imprison all of our minds by virtue of the way that the society around us is structured. So that's what the third story is going to be about. And in terms of the gameplay, you would literally be traveling into the minds of other characters and messing with their psychology. So for instance, like imagine that we find a young Jack the Ripper. He's not yet Jack the Ripper because he's only going to be about 16 years old. But Alice could travel into his mind, and she could be the one who's responsible for turning him into a murderer. Now, right now it may seem like, well, why on earth would you want to do that? But it may be that we discover that by doing that, she's actually changing the course of history and making it so, events turn out a certain way that's better for all of us. And so that's the kind of challenge that she's going to be facing in the new game.
Interesting.
That is an amazing idea.
Yeah, I could see lots of fun stories coming from that.
Yeah, and there's so many people that are really interesting that she's able to have access to in 1876 in London. Thomas Edison was there at that time, Jules Verne, a lot of the French surrealist artists, and a ton of really amazing and famous writers like Mark Twain. these people were coming in and out of London at that time. And so Alice is going to have an ability to shape history, in effect, and so that she'll have access to these great minds, and not just famous people's minds, but she'll also be able to travel into the minds of the poor and homeless, or into the minds of the bankers and the lawyers. I mean, it could be a very wide range of minds that she goes into, but ultimately the goal for her is going to be manipulating those minds in order to achieve certain results in the real world.
What would you say the overall emotional tone for this piece is that you're looking like? What way are you going to approach that? Because you said there's for the film, because you said you were thinking about having different directors and for different parts and whatnot. Would the emotional tone be all over depending on the director, or are they all going to have a general like tone that they follow by?
Well, it's really going to be a matter of whose mind is she going into, and what sort of problems do they have, right? So I imagine that going into the mind of maybe Van Gogh, for instance, you're going to find, his mind is as troubled as Van Gogh was in real life. But maybe inside the mind of Mark Twain, you're going to find a much more colorful, happy, sort of interesting mind. So it's really going to depend whose mind she's into.
How long will these episodes be, each of them?
Well, so for the animation, they could be anywhere from a couple of minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, upwards to 10, 15 minutes. So sort of like the same length as your standard episode of a cartoon like The Simpsons or Futurama. So it could be anywhere in that range. And we're not really putting a limit or a restriction on it. We're just asking the creators who are going to be working on these to come up with the best thing that they can imagine. Whether it's going to be a small story, so that one episode may be sort of like a mini story, or it's more like a visual trip, just like a straight-up music video. That's really going to be left up to the director to decide.
So going back to the story of Alice, it kind of seems like it's about one person fighting a corrupt system. Would you say the series is a commentary on society as a whole? How corruption and mental illnesses, it's still around today. In fact, it's probably even more than how it was back in the industrial era.
So there's a lot of interesting commentary on this topic, and so absolutely the game would add to that. One of the ideas that's talked about very frequently is that our concept, the modern day concept of mental illness, did not exist some decades or hundreds of years ago. You did have people with very specific mental illness, sort of like schizophrenia, or things that were not so much induced by society or the pressures around them, but you didn't have like depression on the scale that you have it in our world today. You didn't have bipolar disorders on the scale that you have in our world today. You didn't have a lot of the things that people now take pills and medicines in order to try to combat. And so the idea is that modern society, as we become more modern, we also become more sick, psychologically and physically. And so, the commentary inside the game is taking place at a time right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. Alice is in London, and so she's going to have an ability to really shape history at the moment that this is taking place. And I guess, one way you could look at this is that she's trying to bring the wonder and beauty of magic and magic of Wonderland, the happy, clean Wonderland that she knows, into the world that we live in. She's trying to keep people healthy by virtue of forcing sort of the magic of her imagination into the world.
So would that be related to her going into the psyche of some of the prestigious people back then at Otherlands?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, if you wanted to change history and affect the world that we live in today, what better place to do that than in the midst of the revolution that has led to our modern society?
So what made you specifically pick this time? Is it just because of all of the great minds that were there around this era for the animated shorts and whatnot? Or was there something bigger that you had in mind for this?
Simply because this is when Alice is alive. If you look at the first game, it took place 10 years after she was put into the asylum. That would have been 1874 or 75, and then Madness Returns takes place in 1875, and so we're setting this new game in 1876. This all aligns with Alice being, she was 18 years old in the first game, she was 19 in the second, and she'll be 20 years old in the third game. So it's just about when Alice was alive. And those are dates related to the life and birth date of the real Alice Liddell, which has always been linked up to the dates for the game.
Going back to the first Alice, were you ever limited on what you were allowed to do creative-wise? Like, were there some ideas you thought, but the producer or someone in the company or something thought it was too dark? Or were you mostly able to do pretty much everything you had wanted to in that type of context?
I don't recall there being a lot of sort of limits put on us, but at the same time, there was a very big difference between the mood and the atmosphere when we were developing the first game and what things felt like when we were developing Madness Returns. So when we were working on the first game, we were being told not to push it, not to make it too dark, not to go crazy with the blood and the guts. And the game was actually the first ever M-rated title published by Electronic Arts. And if you look at it today, it's almost laughable how cute it is. It's not
pretty
dark.
Tame.
It's very tame. But in its day, the original box cover, for instance, there was a picture of Alice with a knife, and the knife had blood on it. And those covers had to be changed because the retailers would not keep them on the shelves. They thought that they were too dark. So a second revision of the box cover got made with Alice holding the ice wand, which is a much tamer, less scary looking weapon. So there were things like that going on around the production of the first game where we were being told to tone it down, not making so bloody, and then of course the box cover got changed. And at that time I remember that the CEO of EA at that time came out in a meeting somewhere and held up Alice and said, look, this is not the kind of game that we here at EA want to be known for making. It was pretty controversial. Of course, now you fast forward the 10 plus years to when we began work on Madness Returns, and the atmosphere had done a complete 180. We were being told to make it bloodier, to make it scarier, to amp up the violence, and so the message was completely the opposite of where we had been. And so throughout the production on Madness Returns, the battle was, in fact, to fight off the demands to make the game more horrific and more violent. Because, in the view of the producers at EA, things like Dead Space, things like, Medal of Honor, things with a gratuitous level of violence, those are the things that are selling very well. And so their feeling was, hey, we need to amp up the violence and the horror in Alice as well.
It's amazing how much the industry changes in just a small amount of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But, one thing to note is that, I resisted that demand. I told them that contrast was very much a requirement for telling a good story and for telling Alice's story, that we could not have it be all blood and guts all the time, that it needed to have a degree of contrast between beauty and darkness. And actually the area you're running around inside of right now is very contentious because they really wanted the first areas of the game to be very dark, very bloody, very gratuitous, because they felt like if we didn't do that, the people would not get hooked on the content. And so we had a lot of fights with them about sort of what were the first enemies we were going to be fighting. And, my point was, look, we haven't really got far enough into the story to start introducing a lot of the really dark enemies she's going to fight with. And on the EA producer side, it was like, look, we need to show our best and scariest stuff right away. And so there was a kind of battle between their desire to get the audience hooked on the really dark material and my desire to have the story unfold in a more natural and sensible fashion.
It's very respectable of you for sticking to your guns. That's a fantastic thing, and we don't see that very often nowadays with games.
Yeah, a lot of developers just fold on the pressure to the publishers. That's where the money's coming from.
Well, that's where our money was coming from as well. And, I wouldn't want to think that we would fold under pressure, that anybody has to. Ultimately, the collaboration between the publisher and the developer should be a healthy one in which, we have something to learn from them and they have a respect for, what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I think that the relationship we had with EA, I wouldn't want to paint that as being an antagonistic or negative one. Actually, they were very supportive. I think you can see by the quality and the content content in the final game, that we did manage to make something that's got that kind of contrast in it. And they, but that's not to say that there weren't sort of debates about it, right? I mean, we did have conversations where they would say darker and we'd say, let's wait and have a little more contrast. But, ultimately, I think it was a very healthy and happy working relationship that we had with them.
That kind of ties in with forum post on Bison Hero we got from Giant Bomb. He's asking if publishers and gamers expect you to make dark takes on fairy tale and classical literature, or do you have?
Yeah,
are you free
it's a great question. It is a kind of trap that I'm in. That when a publisher comes and says, "Will you work on something for us?" They're asking for a dark fairy tale. And when we announce something, one of our own original games, and let's say that it doesn't have that kind of dark fairy tale feeling to it, we have a problem because the audience doesn't show up. Whereas when we announce something that's got a dark fairy tale theme to it, the audience is there. And in fact, that's even there's an even more narrow range, which is that when we announce something that's not Alice related, the audience is much smaller. But when we talk about something related to Alice, we get a much bigger response. And so, I mean, there's a built-in audience there. They have an expectation, and that does guide to a large degree the kinds of projects that it makes sense for me to work on.
Is it tougher to move away from the franchise, you find, because of that critical success you had with Alice?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people want more of the same. They know what to expect.
Yeah.
They enjoyed it. And so, if I came out tomorrow and I said, hey, I'm going to do an FPS with Space Marines, people would be scratching their heads and saying, well, that's not what we know you for. That's not what we want from you. Why don't you work on another Alice? And in fact, I mean, if you saw what happened when we launched the Oz Zombie Kickstarter campaign some weeks ago, we had been telling people, hey, we're going to try to do Alice, we're going to try to do Oz, we don't know which way it's going to go yet. And when we finally announced that it was Oz Zombie, on the Alice page, a lot of the fans there wrote and said, fuck you, I don't want Oz. I mean, they were really angry about it. And I was getting like really angry emails and really angry messages, and the Facebook page was filling up with a lot of hate because they were super angry that it wasn't going to be Alice. And in fact, they were saying, I'm going to not support you on this because I think that's going to force you to make an Alice game sooner. And I'm sitting there thinking, that's not really cool. What that's going to do is it's going to mean that it doesn't mean that an Alice game gets made sooner, and it actually means that you're sort of damaging our ability to do any work or business today. So that's really tough.
Yeah,
I've got a question.
Sad to see that Kickstarter not make it look like it would be a fun game.
It might come back, right? It's not a done deal, is it?
We'll see.
Has there ever been, other than Oz Zombie, any specific genre or game that you've wanted to make that isn't this kind of grim fairy tale-ish game that haven't been able to make because of people holding you back, be it the fans or whoever?
It's not fair to say that the fans are sort of holding me back. I mean, you got to remember, it's just sort of like, it's market pressure in general. So one of the questions would be, where am I going to get the money to make a new game? Let's say like I'd pitch that, hey, I'm going to do a cooking simulator or something. There's not a publisher that's going to give me money for that. There's if I ran a Kickstarter for that, no one would show up and fund it. So that's the challenge, is sort of how do I pitch something that either a publisher or the crowdsource funding or an investor or somebody is going to say, yeah, we have faith that you can do that and that people are going to want to see that from you. So that's kind of what's, I guess you'd say, holding me back. But I mean, there's worse positions to be in, right? It's not terrible to be asked to make stuff like this because obviously, the Alice stuff is really fun. I think that the biggest challenge for me is that I don't own the rights to Alice. EA controls that. So that's one of the reasons we're running this Kickstarter for the film side of things, because if we can own the film side, then it gives me a better control over the franchise, at least a part of the franchise in general, and hopefully makes it easier to get stuff related to Alice made in the future.
Are you free to say who owns the rights to the Alice film right now?
Yeah, it's some producers, film producers in Hollywood. They came to EA and they bought the film rights before the first Alice game was even done. And so EA sold them those rights, and I think to this day they probably aren't very happy that they did that, so that being able to purchase these before they go back on the open market is a pretty big deal for me, because it means I get to own something that's a big part of the value of this property.
Going back to the story of Alice, do you think if Alice was manifested today, would you see her someone like Malala Yousafzai or Judy Chamberlain? someone who moved from victimization to action to become an activist?
Well, I think that's what's happening in the progression of the story, is that in the first one, it's an internal battle that she's trying to realize her potential as a human being, and she's trying to escape the bondage of her own emotions. In the second story, the battle moves up a level, and so now she's fighting a real-world enemy who threatens not only her physical well-being, but also the well-being of a small group of people around her, the children in that home with her. In the third game, like I said, she's going to move up one more level, so that now she's fighting for society in general. She's fighting for us. And so she's fighting for not just herself, not just for those near to her, but she's taken on a much larger role in trying to shape the world that we live in. So absolutely, I think that's a good analogy.
We have a question in chat. Will any characters from the Wonderland return in Otherlands considering change of location?
Yeah, I mean, this has come up a couple times, and I don't think there's any reason to suggest that you would not see the Cheshire Cat or the Mad Hatter inside, say, the mind of Thomas Edison. Remember that the characters in Wonderland are the extensions of Alice's mind, and so where she goes, they go. So that means that we could be inside the mind of Thomas Edison. In order for Alice to unlock some door, she may need the assistance of the Hatter. But maybe in order to get the Hatter to help her out, she's going to have to go through one of his puzzles or complete something on his behalf. So, yeah, I think that having the Wonderland characters enter into these other spaces, there's ways we can make that make sense and make that really fun. And on top of that, I think that if you were looking at an Otherlands game, it may make sense for her to return to Wonderland from time to time as a home base. And so that'll be a place where she can regroup. Maybe she goes back to Wonderland to select a range of characters to take with her into the next mind. I think there's a lot of different ways we could approach that. And I think that was discussed a little bit when we were talking about the Otherlands game concept early on, was that you would build a party and that party would be taken into combat alongside Alice. And so, yeah, we could see something where Alice is going into the mind of Jack the Ripper, and then she has characters like the Cheshire Cat or the Mad Hatter as people who are fighting in combat alongside her.
So will each of the episodes be drawn and produced by separate teams in the studio?
Yeah, so the way we're approaching the animations is that we, Spicy Horse, will not be animating these. You should look at us like film producers, that we're going out, we're marketing the product, we're raising money to get the animations made, but ultimately we're going to go to experienced writers, directors, animators, and animation companies and work with them to have each of the individual animations produced. Then once those are produced, we'll work to distribute them, or we'll work to put them all together on the DVD and get them out to the customer. Our involvement in the actual production of, or the animation of these things is mainly going to be limited to like my oversight in terms of making sure that these animators don't do things that sort of go too far off of where I think the property should be or the character should be. But beyond that, it's going to be up to those animation teams to come up with the interior spaces of these minds and the story that we're going to see unfolding as Alice travels through them.
Gotcha. So you keep them in line with the vision of the concept for the episodes. We have a question from Steam Gifts from Jade, and he'd like to ask, if you had full creative license to go wherever you wanted with the series, where would you take the franchise?
So, I mean, I think that's what we're talking about doing with Otherlands. Otherlands is the third and natural part extension of the story, and that is the full and creative, full creative license to go. I mean, it's not really something where I'm saying I have full license, therefore I'm going to take Alice into outer space. It's a question of what makes sense for Alice's story as we've seen her progress through the first two games. And the idea of Otherlands is the natural progression for Alice as a hero. And so that is the full creative license. That is exactly where I'd like to take her if we're given the opportunity.
For about how long would you say you've wanted to do something like Otherlands?
Well, the idea for Otherlands started to form while we were working on Madness Returns. So I guess that, it's been something that I've thought about since then, and it's really sort of to take full form in the last, since the beginning of this year.
As a film or as a game?
Both the film and game ideas sort of came together at the same time.
Do you think it would be possible to have different things happen in the film than in the game, but have like kind of show different characters from said film in the game and vice versa?
Well, I think it's a necessity. There's quite a long list of characters that we can play with, but like Thomas Edison, that's a mind that I'm very interested in seeing us explore, and I think that it would be a shame to sort of have Thomas Edison in the animations, but then somehow not have him in the game. I think that naturally we're going to see, especially a lot of these larger, more well-known characters appear in both the animations and in the game.
Why is Otherlands a series of shorts and not a new game?
Well, because it's EA that controls the rights to the game, and Otherlands is an extension of the rights to the film side of the Alice property. So it's an unusual situation. It doesn't happen very often, but in the instance of Alice, back when we were making the first game, the rights were split. They ended up being sold, the film rights being sold to some producers from Hollywood, so that EA controls the interactive aspect of the Alice property, and these producers control the film aspect of the Alice property. Now, those producers have recently come to me and asked, would I like to purchase those film rights? And of course I would. And so if I'm able to have hands on the film rights, I'm then going to want to exploit those and turn those into Otherlands. And the reason I'm choosing to go with Otherlands first is because by doing that, I have a sense that we'll be able to communicate to EA the value of and the level of interest in this idea, and that will then inspire them to move more quickly to help us get a third game made. But ultimately, whether or not a game happens is all coming down to a decision that's going to have to be made by EA. They're going to have to say, yeah, we're interested in seeing a third game made. And just, so I mean, that's a conversation I'm having with them. There's conversations going on weekly to discuss getting a third game made. And so I think that that's still very much a possibility. It's a possibility in the near future. But the focus today, again, is on getting the film rights secured so that I own and control those, and so they don't end up being owned and controlled by someone else.
Does that happen to all game franchises? They have their own separate film rights and game rights?
No, that's why I'm saying it's unusual to have this happen. Of course, every property has rights. So let's say that you ended up making your own cooking simulator, right?
Okay.
So you've got the cooking simulator, and it becomes a successful iPhone game. But then somebody approaches you and says, we'd like to turn this into a TV series,
right,
or we'd like to turn this into a book, or we'd like to turn this into a soundtrack. Every time you create an extension to, or you suggest an extension to a property, that's some aspect or another of the rights. Now, normally, when you create something, or if you're EA, you own all aspects, all forms of exploitation, from T-shirts to movies to soundtracks to bumper stickers. But you, of course, can write a piece of paper that says, I'm giving Bob or Joe or somebody control of this aspect. Now, most of the time, if you're Activision, if you're EA, you do a license deal. That means that you give a limited license for a limited period of time to some piece of your property, so that someone could make a Call of Duty lunchbox. But it doesn't mean that they own that forever. It just means they have a license to make Call of Duty lunchboxes. In this instance, what's strange is that EA didn't sell a license. They sold the rights outright. That means that if I purchase these, then I or my company forever. The thing that really excites me about the project is the idea that so many different people can be involved with it. I mean, that's one of the things that I've always enjoyed about making games, is that people see my name on the box, but what they kind of tend to forget is, Alice Madness Returns took 80 people inside of our studio, another 65 people outside of our studio, plus another probably 60 people involved with things unrelated to, the actual game production. So you're talking like, 200, 300 people working on this product. That's the fun thing for me about working on these games, is that every time I see, as you guys are running through this, a texture, a model, an enemy, what I see is not my expression. What I see is the expression of 200, 300 people who all had a blast building this game. And so that's what's exciting to me about the animation project.
Any of the artists that work on this game going to be working on Otherlands that you can think of?
Yeah, as you're playing the game, you'll see the 2D motion graphics that make up the memories that she's discovering. And that's also the big intro sequence to the game. That guy has just confirmed that he's going to come back and do motion graphics for us as well.
Any chance of the project being shown at film festivals around the world, like Sundance Film Festival? So I think
I certainly hope so.
Another movie actually did that. Indie Game, the movie. They got optioned by HBO.
Sure. Yeah, I hope that we create something that ends up, being valuable enough, interesting enough that people want to see it in places like that. I certainly think there's the potential here. I mean, if you just think about the pitch very quickly, Alice and her Wonderland traveling into the minds of some of history's greatest writers, inventors, and politicians, and imagine this, series of, maybe it ends up being 20 or 100 animations. This is a sort of film festival of the mind. I think that as a collection, that's got a lot of value, and so there could be a lot of interest for this in different places around the world.
So what's it like living in Shanghai?
It's a really incredible time to be here. So I've been out here for almost 10 years, and in the last 10 years, I've witnessed so much change within the culture, everything from banking and creativity to sexuality, the way the government's working, the way the media works. It's just an incredible time. There's a sort of revolution happening in many, many aspects of the society. So it kind of feels like sitting back and watching history unfold and fast forward, because that's the other thing. Everything happens very, very quickly here. The last 10 years, 15 years, there's been this mass movement of somewhere around 300 or 400 million people from a lower income class to middle upper income class. So you have a sudden explosion of all the things that go along with the middle class. Everybody's buying cars, they're drinking Starbucks, they're going to buy their jeans at Gap. So some of this stuff is not great to witness, but at the same time, it's still incredible to watch a society become westernized so quickly. But then, of course, that mixes together with the old and the history of China. And I love to get outside and to travel and to see the remote parts that are still sort of untouched by this progress, if that's what we call it. And that's an incredible experience, and I feel very lucky for that as well, to be able to be in a place that, when I was born, so I was born in 1972, China would have been inaccessible to the outside world and to Americans specifically. And so now I'm in a place that, when I was growing up, communist China, with quote marks around it, was sort of this very scary, dark, evil place. And yet here we are, and China has become the factory to the world, and it's now becoming one of the world's great superpowers. It's just a very incredible experience to be able to see this firsthand.
That kind of relates to a quote on your Kickstarter bio from Mark Twain. That's actually one of my favorite quotes from him. Travel's fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. That's awesome. I wish I could do that.
I keep that up there, and that's printed on my wall because so many people are so bigoted about the world, and not just about China, but they're so unaware of the beauty, the depth of the world. That when you travel and you start to see how similar everybody around the world is, but also how beautifully dissimilar we all are, it really opens up your eyes and makes you realize that anything other than just fully embracing the wonder of the world and the wonder of other people is a complete waste of time. And
Absolutely.
Yet we have entire societies of people who go through life being afraid of each other, being afraid of the outside world, being afraid of the unknown. And this, I think, a lot of it has to do with what our governments are trying to make us feel. And that's one of the topics that's really interesting to me, especially being an expat and living outside of the U.S., is just how much fear governments push on to people and how much of a divide they create between you, me, and everybody else in the world. I think that's one of the reasons that quote is so inspiring to me. I wish more people were aware of it.
Oh, yeah, it's my favorite. That actually kind of ties in with Alice's story, how in the first game, she's trying to break out from being stuck in an asylum, being afraid to live, and being able to travel. You just open up your mind to all kinds of possibilities, and that's what she's doing now. She's trying to free people's minds.
You're exactly right, and that is exactly the tone, the theme for the series of the game, is to escape the illness of the emotions that have been forced upon you by events that are outside of your control. Alice's story is one for all of us for achieving the freedom of our minds. And so I think that when you look at traditional hero stories, that's the same story that Neo has in The Matrix. That's the same story that Luke has in the Star Wars. And that's one of the reasons why these stories are so powerful and so inspirational for us, is that we all know, subconsciously, we know that we're trapped. We know that the world around us traps us. And so these stories give us a sense of hope that we might be able to express ourselves creatively. We might be able to break free from these things.
Yeah, that's reflected in the artwork too. When I was looking around for screenshots of the games, it really puts home the message of, there's more to life than just being stuck in a hole. Try to break free.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we got a question from SFK. Do you think the inevitable move to cloud-based computing will be detrimental to game development in any way in the future?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with the concept of everything moving inevitably to cloud-based. I think we're going to end up with a kind of blend of cloud and local data, and hopefully that kind of will become seamless. I wonder if the guy asking that question is worried about the idea of always online. But I think in general, when people look at something that's an advance in technology and they worry about whether or not this is going to be detrimental, it probably would make sense to kind of look at, is it really going to impact every form of game that you could ever play? It's sort of like people who get up in arms about mobile games, but they're kind of not taking into account that the technology is going to evolve to a point where there's very little distinction between a mobile device and the power that you have in a console or a laptop, and so the line between a mobile game and a not mobile game is going to blur and eventually go away. So kind of railing against the idea of mobile games today, 20 years from now, people are going to laugh and be like, what the hell's a mobile game? All games come on devices that I can keep in my pocket. What's the big deal? I think it's pretty funny that over the last 20 years, so 20 years that I've been making games, the fact that we're still using mouse and keyboard to drive our games, or we're still using an analog joystick to drive our games. These are devices that are 20, 30 years older. The keyboard is even older than that. We need desperately to advance the input-output that we use with our games, because until we do that, the game designs are really not going to advance. We've sort of explored and seen the end-all, be-all of all the things we could do design-wise with the control schemes that we have today. So if we're going to see really proper innovation, we're going to have to start moving towards different types of input-output.
The Kickstarter page doesn't have a specific digital distribution agreement yet. Is there any possibility to have the animation movie available on Steam?
Yeah, we are talking with a number of different digital distributors about how to get this out there. It could be Steam, it could be machinima.com, it could be, I think there was another one that just contacted us this morning. But what I would hope that we could do is set up a bunch of non-exclusive distribution agreements with a variety of different digital distributors, and that way people who want to have access to this stuff can get access. So eventually what we'll try to do is kind of like what we've done with our games. Like if you backed our Akinero campaign, then once we put Akinero on Steam, we gave you credits linked to the Steam version so that you could get access to that without having to pay for it, right? That would be the same thing that we would do with digital distribution for the animations, is just make sure that backers on the Kickstarter, whatever distribution channels we set up in the future, that those then link into the people who backed the project, so they can get access wherever they want to get access.
This is off topic Alice-wise, but how was your time at ID Software? That was like my childhood growing up. Doom shareware, I don't know how many times I played that before I could finally buy it.
Yeah, it was a really incredible experience for me. It was sort of like boot camp for the games industry, because prior to that, I don't know how much of my story you know, but I was a high school dropout, and I was working as a car mechanic, and so my entry into id Software happened as a result of living next door to John Carmack, and he offered me a job. I initially started off answering the phones and doing tech support, and then I quickly moved into level design and other aspects of development there. And when I was offered that opportunity, I went in the front door, and then I literally would not leave. Once I said, okay, now I'm working at id Software, I'm not going home. And so I taught myself everything there was to know about the business and about the making the games. And so I was there for a little over 4 years, and eventually they fired me. But before that, I got to be involved with Doom, Doom 2, Quake 2, and a whole bunch of others.
So
it was just really incredible.
Did you teach? Were you self-taught about the game industries? Did you teach?
Yeah, pretty much everything that I know today has been self-taught. I'm a big believer in self-teaching, and whenever people ask me if they should go to a university to learn game or art or whatever, I try to encourage them. Maybe they're going to do that anyway, but I try to encourage them to focus on self-taught as much as possible, because I think that you tend to get a lot more out of that. And so, everything I know about games, game development, game business, programming, level design, all that stuff was self-taught.
Actually, the player that's streaming Alice Madness Returns right now is actually self-taught coder.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I noticed is because I know I'm a high school dropout, I oftentimes will feel concerned that I'm not that I may be the dumbest person in the room, right? And so as a result, I'm constantly driving myself to learn more, read more, understand more, and to teach myself more. And so I think that that's a fairly healthy concern, because unlike a lot of people I know that they graduate university and they kind of feel like, well, I've got this piece of paper that says I know what I'm doing, they never ask questions again. They sort of never, not everybody, I mean, I'm making a generalization, but a lot of people I've met, they sort of go, well, I've got this piece of paper that says I know everything there is to know about, say, marketing. Therefore, you must believe that what I'm saying about marketing is correct because I've got a degree. And in fact, you can turn around and show them that, like, look, since you got your degree, there's been a lot of study on behavioral psychology that suggests that maybe people would respond better to X, Y, and Z thing. And there's a lot of people you'll meet who are very resistant to that. They go, nope, I paid my money, I know my stuff, and I'm not going to sort of open up to the suggestion you're making that there might be a different way of doing this.
Spending so much time working on a game or any form of media, after you're done with all of that, does it ever feel like, you're already just sick of having seen this, having put so many tons of hours into it, like that you couldn't play through your whole game, or you couldn't just sit down and enjoy it because you're like, I remember all the blood, sweat, and tears that went into it, and it's just like, I've been seeing this every day for just months or years, and you're just tired of seeing so much of it? Has that ever happened, like, just kind of gotten sick of it?
Well, I think certainly when you finish a project, so like at the end of Alice Madness Returns, we'd been working on it for 2 years. It took us over 18 months prior to the beginning of development to even get the deal in place. There's 18 months of trying to get a deal done. Then there were 2 years of working on the game. So yeah, I mean, once I got to the end of that period of time, I was just like done. I did not want to think about or see or do anything related to Alice at all. But now, like, as I'm watching you guys play through this, I'm pretty amazed at like what I'm seeing, because it's a lot of it that you sort of, I'm seeing it differently now, because I'm not seeing a lot of the mistakes anymore. I'm sort of seeing it as I think from a consumer point of view.
When was the last time you played Alice Madness Returns? It's tough to know that you made some then. It's been over a year or more now. It's been quite a while. Do you go back to it every now and then just to see your progress? I do not. I don't really go back and play my games over, and I don't really go back and play a lot of games over. Once I've finished a game, I kind of tend to walk away from it. Do you have any plans for bringing Grimm to Steam in the foreseeable future? That's a great question. I would love to bring Grimm to Steam. One of the challenges we've run into is that because there are 24 episodes, actually 23 episodes, but the last one is sort of two rolled into one, there's resistance on the part of Steam for letting us bring that content there, because there's so much of it. I think that what we might have to try to do is put it into Greenlight, and then put it into Greenlight as a big bundle, as a package, and then see if they would let us get away with that, which actually it reminds me we need to put it on Greenlight. If you do, all of us will upvote it. I've sort of been curious about that, because like I got the feeling that if we put that on Steam, that we would just get a bunch of people railing against it and hating on it, because it seems like the Steam community, they sort of really want vampire or zombie or other kind of dark games, and I kind of feel like the art style, the tone of Grimm, that most people on Steam would be like, no, I'm not interested in this. I don't want anything to do with this.
I wouldn't say everyone would be that way, because Steam's got a bunch of different groups of fans. Yeah. There are a lot of people that will support anything that looks just different, or anything that appeals to them. And then there are some people that also have like they just love seeing old games show back up. They're like, Steam will bring back old games and people will just eat them up, and that happens all the time. And I don't really think it's just the zombie fans and the shooter fans that are on Steam. I've seen many different people and made friends with many different people through PC gaming that have a lot of different tastes. So okay, I think it'd be the best place overall, and I think you'd have a better chance than say having a console release or a or something like that in the future. It is
right.
Personally, I would think like your shooters, your zombie fans, a lot of those are more on console. Steam's kind of a anything goes sort of deal.
That's not really what we've seen. The experience that we've had. So we put 3 games up on Steam in early access. I mean, in Greenlight. Sorry. And so in Greenlight, we put Akinero, we put another game called Crazy Fairies, and we put another game called Big Head Bash. And what's interesting is that, so Akinero finally made it through Greenlight. It got accepted. But that, Akinero is like basically Diablo's set in Japan of 100 years ago. So it's, an ARPG with a fairly dark art style. And I think, when you looked at the artwork and you kind of looked at the pitch, people were like, yeah, I want to see this on Steam. This looks like a Steam game. I mean, that's the commentary we would hear pretty often. Whereas the other 2 games, they have very cute, kind of colorful art style, but you'd think that people on Steam would like them. Like Crazy Fairies is a very complicated, it's an artillery shooter, multiplayer artillery shooter, but it's got really deep RPG elements to it. And Big Head Bash is a real-time multiplayer shooter inside on with like all these really cool licensed toys. It's like set inside of a toy shop. And again, you'd think like, well, why wouldn't you guys like this? And what we saw coming across in the comments was, get this garbage off of Steam constantly. Like, this is a Facebook game, or this looks like it's for kids, or this just looks awful, or whatever. And so what we saw was a sort of group think around the content that seemed to me to be driven almost entirely by the color palette. It was like, this is too colorful, get out of here, So I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't give me a lot of faith in
Was it
criticisms usually tend to stand out too much, though, as opposed to positive, constructive.
It doesn't cost us anything to put it up on Greenlight, so we'll definitely give it a shot. I think we've just been so busy with everything else that it just hasn't happened yet.
Speaking of Steam, Edison's wondering, what are your favorite games to play?
I don't play a lot of games on Steam, but recently I was playing The Last of Us, and I was really enjoying that. And then before that was the Telltale's Walking Dead, and having a lot of fun with that. Prior to that, I really wasn't playing much of anything, but I'm almost always sort of jumping into and playing Minecraft from time to time. That's kind of like very relaxing. I think the last big game that I really played in full might have been like Fallout, the last Fallout, which was ages ago, but mainly just because I'm too busy. So it's most of the time I'm just playing Minecraft, to be honest with you.
Or some of our guys in the Steam chat are looking at your green lights for the other ones, the more colorful ones, and they seem to like it.
Crazy Fairies is very similar to Worms, and it's Worms multiplayer, and then, like I said, there's a tremendous amount of sort of RPG-style depth to it. But I think what the people on Steam were sort of not happy about, 2 things. The art style seemed very cutesy, too cutesy to them, and the other thing is it's a free-to-play game. So in order to get into the game and play it, you can do everything for free, but there's also an in-game currency. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, like when we put up Akinero, they also were pretty resistant to that. They're like, well, this looks great, but why are you trying to make me pay money to play this?
I think a lot of people are afraid of pay-to-win type thing, because that happens a lot in free-to-play games. So I think if you showed them how exactly the currency system would affect the game itself, I think more people would pay more attention to it, because a lot of people, when they see free-to-play games now, they just think, okay, how much money do I have to drop in this to win? That sort of deal. Because a lot of games do that.
I think with all of the games, we've tried to make it clear that they all contain mechanics where you never have to pay a dime, that you can actually grind your way to all of the content in all of the games. And that's, to be honest with you, that's a little bit detrimental to us as a developer, because we don't, like most developers of free-to-play games, we don't employ pay-to-win mechanics. We don't employ some of the more evil psychological tricks that they use in order to kind of get you addicted and then put a paywall in front of you. We don't do anything like that at all. And what that means is that compared to some of the pay-to-win games, our games perform much more poorly financially than those games do, and yet we still get beat up for being a free-to-play game. And we still have people accuse us of being pay-to-win, even though we're very distinctly not, and we pay a price for not being pay-to-win. But the problem is you almost can't engage with those people in that conversation conversation. Once they see a free-to-play game, they convince themselves that it's pay to win. That's it. It's over. There's not a debate. There's not a conversation. They just slam you and they walk away. Yeah, Crazy Fairies is very similar to Gunbound. A lot of people made that comparison in the past. And one of the cool things about Crazy Fairies is you can play cross-platform from anything to anything in real time. So you can play from Mac, PC, web browser, client, Linux, iOS, and Android. All at the same, all real time. Hold on 1 second, I'll be right back.
Okay. So Edison has a question from Steam Chat, and he's asking, what artists do you admire? Do you have any favorites?
Well, if you look at the Alice games, I mean, you'll see a lot of influence from an artist like Mark Ryden is one that I like a lot. In the past, like I did Bad Day LA, that was in collaboration with these guys called Cozy and Dan that are LA-based artists that do kind of photorealistic hand-drawn sketch stuff. And that was how the Bad Day LA game ended up with the art style that it had. But I mean, for me personally, actually these days, like in my house, I have a lot of art from modern day Chinese artists. And so if you go around Shanghai, you'll find a lot of galleries here featuring the art from guys here in Shanghai or Beijing. And they're doing a lot of really cool, really interesting stuff. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody listening to this would necessarily know their names. But that's a lot of art that I'm interested in for my home these days. It's actually pretty modern stuff, but it's interesting how dark a lot of it is. Like I'm always impressed with just how kind of, I don't know if gothic is the right word, though some of it is, but there's a sort of dark theme. Well, you know, a lot of it contains political commentary, right? So I mean, one of the ways that people express their discontent with issues in China, of course, is going to be through their music and their art. And so what you end up with here is, painting or illustration that sort of communicates that dissatisfaction, that sense of the massive change that's taking place within the culture right now. So a lot of the commentary happens to be on the rapid commercialization of China, and so you'll see a lot of commentary on capitalism merged together with commentary on communism. So that results in artwork that's got a very interesting social and political feeling to it.
So would one of those artists be Wei Wei?
Wei, yeah, I like his stuff a lot. I've seen his stuff in person at the Tate in London and also here in China. So yeah, I'm a fan of his stuff. But I mean, he's not really like at the top of the list. I'll see if I can find a link to send you for some of the guys that I like. I do need to run pretty soon here because we are going to have barbecue. The weather's really nice and we're going to do a barbecue today, and I need to run to the store and buy stuff and make potato salad and like get ready for people to come over. So,
how do you feel about the lower cost of entry to make video games today and the rise of indie game market versus projects you've worked in the past?
Well, I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think that there's a number of things that we see happening today that are really sort of democratizing the industry as a whole. And I think that if we look back at sort of the last 15 years, in fact, gamers and developers really ought to be revolting against what we saw, which was a monopoly driven by the publishers and the retailers to make it so only a select few people could develop and publish games to consoles. And so what we're seeing these days is that access to the technology has become more widespread with things like Unity Engine. Access to distribution platforms has become, like virtually a snap of the finger with mobile and web, and access to funding now is even becoming something that's much more democratic in the sense that you could go to Indiegogo or Kickstarter and pitch and get funding to develop something. So it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, we ought to expect that if we combine the things I just mentioned with the coming revolution in input and output, like Oculus Rift, or devices that are reading our brain waves in order to drive the games that we're playing. If we combine all those things together, my prediction is that we're going to see in the next 3 to 4 years some of the most significant advances in game design and presentation that we've seen ever. So I think that the next sort of 5 years are going to be more interesting, more innovative than the last 20 years altogether.
Have you thought about approaching those bundle sites for the projects that you're doing?
We did, I think it was Groupies when Akinero was still in open beta. And that, I think, attracted a fair number of, a fair amount of attention. I remember there being some kind of like people being some of the groupies people being upset because they thought that like we had done something bad when we went to Steam, and I think they were confused. I think they assumed that we made money off of being in that bundle, and we didn't, because it was just access to a free game that was in an open beta. But besides that one kind of hiccup, it was actually a good experience for us, and we're definitely looking to do that again with a couple of those different platforms.
If you have any advice for people today about trying to break into the game industry.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing, can you hold on just one second? So the question is advice for getting into the industry today. Absolutely. So the biggest thing is just go and do it. This is one of the few times I've ever seen in the industry history that you could go and grab an engine and grab access to a distribution platform and just build something. And you really don't need a distributor. You don't need a big budget. You don't need somebody telling you that you've got the right piece of paper or experience. The reality is that you could go off and become insanely successful inside of 6 months on the right simple idea. And so, really the truth is the only thing holding people back from that at this point is just that they're not doing it. I mean, it's that they've somehow convinced themselves that they need to wait until the right time, until they've got access to the right tools. And I think that's just it's not the case. I mean, there's just so much opportunity today that people should just go out and start building.
I think that's a perfect way to end our interview. What do you think? We want to thank you again, Mr. McGee, for joining us on your chat.
Sure. Thank you so much for giving me some time to talk about them.
Definitely. We urge everyone to check out your Kickstarter, make a pledge, and if you can't do that, spread the word about it, because we don't want this series to end with just 2.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to run off and make potato salad now, so you guys have fun with
all right.
Enjoy
the rest of the game.
Let's go ahead and give a special thank you to JC for making all of this possible.